Why don't we introduce ourselves?
Sure, let's
Who,
do
who are
that.
you? Who are you?
Hi. Hello, everyone, and lovely to see you all. My name's Steve Beatty. I'm one of the founders at Meld Studios.
And I'm Jana DeVilder, also one of the founders of Meld. And we have I can see some other Meldsters who are in and around here. And as um, co-owners of the business, we may have founded it, but Meld is for all of us. So thank you all for being here. Um, let me just move
Let's go.
on. So let's just start by taking a moment to acknowledge the lands from which we're all meeting on and convening on. Even if we are meeting in a virtual space, we're all grounded in really deeply cultural environments. And so we want to acknowledge the knowledge holders, um, past, present, and emerging. We also want to acknowledge that it's in these times of gathering, especially across the lands, we know that we're bringing together a lot of knowledge even in this moment. And so there's knowledge that exists outside of ourselves, and it's in the bringing that together that we even get so much more. So just want to show and share our gratitude for where we are. We're in Sydney on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And so very happy and welcome you to share in the chat if you'd like to share where which lands you're on today and where you're coming from. That just gives us a sense of the vibrancy of where we all are. So here we begin. Services. So there's a lot of us that are here today that are drawn to this topic for one reason or another. And so while I see hands raised. I just want to check real quick. Is everything okay? No? Okay.
We're good.
That was just maybe a greeting, a hello.
Excellent.
Excellent. So back to services. So while we all may be coming from lots of different perspectives and have lots of differences as individuals, there's one thing that's guaranteed in common for all of us that are here in this room today, which is services. Which sounds so nerdy when I say it in that way, but I have an enormous enthusiasm for services, and I guess the thing about services is that every organization is a service organization. No matter what kind of organization you are, you may say, well, I do products. And I said, well, that's a service. That's providing a service to somebody else. And so from a perspective of all of us and the different roles and experiences and expectations of why we're here. The thing about services is that we each experience services day in and day out.
Mm.
We're literally meeting in a service. So Zoom is actually a service. So we're meeting inside of a service, which is a bit strange to think about. So many of you may be responsible for managing and delivering services. Maybe you improve services. Maybe you imagine new services. Maybe you design services or implement those services or are part of the front line in having a moment within a service. And so what I just wanted to say is what we're going to be talking about today, we may be talking about specific examples of types of services, but I really encourage you to extract out from, don't get caught up in, oh, well, that's in financial services, so that has nothing to do with me. Extract out kind of the essence of what's happening in that moment, because it's a lot of this is really applicable across all of the spaces and places that we are working in. And I'm thinking that my next tattoo, I don't have a tattoo, but maybe a tattoo I might get someday in my future might be I love services.
What do you mean next?
Next, yeah, I need to start. I need to have one. So um, there you go. So just to get us into some shared language, um, and because sometimes if we looked at the thought bubble above each of our heads when we say service, that might mean different things, or we might have a different construction of what that actually is. And so one of the ways that we talk about it around these parts is around kind of thinking about a service as being made up of lots of different things, obviously, but that service is an object of design. So service can be an act, but it also is made up of things. So just as there are people who design chairs, and that's furniture, and it has function, and it has materiality to it. When we're talking about service, we're also talking about that service itself has materiality to it, even though some of it may feel very ephemeral and intangible. The reason why we like to put some language to that is because it helps us in no service can, well, it's very rare for a service to be able to be delivered unless you're like a one hit hero wonder who can do the whole thing, which a lot of independent people can do. A lot of the services that you're working on take a lot of different people across a lot of different parts and skills and orchestration. And so this is just a very simple visualization of kind of a way to think about services in terms of breaking it down. So this is just like one of those little flip charts. So I don't know if you as a child had access or as an adult, because I still enjoy these books where when you open them up, it's like the head, there's like 5 different heads that you can pick from and 3 different torsos and 6 different legs. And so you could get these different combinations. And what this is trying to show is that if you think about the top part of that flip book being kind of the experience of somebody receiving a service. So there's different ways that I can know about a service. There's different ways that I can evaluate if it's right for me. There's different ways for me to acquire it. I might have to order it. I might have to apply for it. I might just get it because of who I am, because I live in a certain place. So I have to get the service, but now that I've gotten it, I'm experiencing it. And the word use, I kind of hate, but if anybody else has other ways to kind of frame that, the use is really around that. Okay, so now I'm in the service. That might be I'm at a restaurant getting served the food, or it might be that I'm now going to university and getting my class. And so
have garbage collected or something like that.
That's right. So that's kind of, and a lot of times we suspect that when we're talking about service, people really focus in on that part and aren't thinking about some of these other things. And so the ask part might be, how do I ask for help, or how do I ask to clarify something, or how do I just know things? Change can be around, what if I want to change something about the service? And this might be particularly true for services that I stay in for a long period of time, or I keep coming back to, or I want to expand, or I want to contract. And how do I end the service? So what's that experience of then I'm done, and sometimes I'm done and I want out, or sometimes it's just that it's done and it's at the end. That bottom part is kind of some language to be thinking about in terms of what's the perspective of the organization who's delivering the service. So to contrast, how does a customer know about something? It's really, how does an organization position it? How do you then proposition and kind of showcase what something is to help people make a choice? Some of the services that you're all coming from there's no choice. It's just you're in, and so you don't necessarily feel the pressure to have to do that. Or others, like that's a huge part of what you're doing. Provision. So then how do I actually help somebody get this service? Deliver then. So now we're in kind of that service delivery moment. How do we actually provide that service to people? And support. How do we improve it? How do we offboard it? There's all sorts of little intricacies in here, and you could probably expand this out to be even more specific if you want. But we offer this as a starting point so that when we're talking about service, we're not just talking about that middle part, about the use or the experience of that middle part. We're talking about the end to end. And so what this actually means for a lot of organizations is that when we're talking about service effectiveness, which is what we're here to talk about today, sometimes we might be responsible for a part of this, and there might be other teams or other roles who are responsible for other things. So this just goes to reinforce how important orchestration is, I guess, across this piece. And so you can have a really strong part of this service be really great, but if nobody can get to it, or if nobody can get support for it, the whole thing might kind of fall down and apart. So just wanted to give that as sort of shared language for us as we start to go into talking about services. So from what I can gather from all of you, we're all coming from quite different types of services. And I want to highlight this just so that we can start to see that while we're different, there's commonalities. So some of you are coming from services that you can join. Some of you are coming from councils because that's where, so you're delivering services for people and community and businesses that are and visitors that are in that space. Some of you are delivering services that support mental and physical health, services that protect you, services that help other organizations to deliver their services, services that get you to places, to transport you in spaces, services that support you in the toughest of times, utilities, even services that help you design or redesign your services, which is very meta. But all of us are coming from these different spaces, and I think it's a nice way to kind of remind ourselves of some of those commonalities as well. So let's get into why a lot of us are here, which is an acknowledgement of the pressure. The pressure is real. We've got a lot of pressure coming from from all sorts of different angles. And when it comes to the services that you support or deliver, you might be hearing things like make it faster, cut a step. We want to reduce support. We want to scale it. We want to spend less money. I'm curious if you're happy to share and chat. I'm curious about what are some of the things that you get pressured about. What are some of the ways that that's getting framed and shared? And this might be coming, and pressures might be coming from yourself in terms of you're seeing things that make you think this isn't working, or the very real pressures that we're all feeling in the market today in terms of everything feels so expensive, so I can't spend a lot of money, or I need to reduce the cost. So very curious about the pressure could be coming in lots of different angles from yourself in terms of you knowing what's going on in your service, but also can be coming from the people that you work with, leadership in your organizations, or mandates, or lots of different things. So acknowledging that it comes at in lots of different forms. And the thing that we really want to focus on is that with that pressure often comes an expectation of action.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to talk about today is how do we take the pressure and make decisions that can address the pressure, but also don't take away from the very value that we know that we are providing in our service. And this is the real tension that we're probably all facing kind of day in and day out, is that there are ideals that we might want to be kind of, if money and time and effort and capacity were not an issue, we might all do things a lot differently. But we know that we work in a land and we work in a space of constraint. And so what we want to offer to you is a conversation around how we can start with service effectiveness and then think about efficiency. Because a lot of those pressures can come from this sense of being more efficient.
Yep.
And we understand where that can come from. But what we're saying is let's make sure that we're not using that only as the way in which we make some decisions. So why don't we explore what
what
that
do
means?
we actually mean by that?
Yeah.
And look, there's a certain irony for me in that I literally just came out of a meeting in which affordability of something was being prioritized in a way that would fundamentally undermine the value proposition of doing it in the first place. It would absolutely mean that less customers would use it, that less revenue would come in as a result. And yet the driver was around the price of doing this thing. So like it's absolutely fresh. I'm fresh out of having that argument 20 minutes ago. So let's talk about it a little bit. So when we think about efficiency and we're talking about things like as effectively doing more with less or doing the same with less, doing things faster, doing things with less waste, less waiting time. We've got people standing in a queue. How do we speed up the queue? How do we speed up our processing times? A real sort of focus on that aspect of it. Um, and you can see from a solution point of view that we then start to think about, well, how do we speed things up? How do we automate things? How do we improve our technology? That type of thinking really sorts of really tends to dominate our solutions. We focus on the time it takes to do things, how many things we can do at the same time, and we try and increase those metrics. When we think about effectiveness, we tend to think more about, rather than how something is being done, we're focusing more on what is attempting to be done and what the impact of that thing might be. So what are the outcomes? What are the objectives? What is the influence or the impact that that service is trying to have? The need that it's trying to meet, the behavior that it's trying to encourage,
Mm.
and then look at how to deliver that more effectively or more efficiently. So
Mm-hmm.
the focus is really on, well, what do people want from it? What are they trying to achieve?
Mm.
Um, Things like a job to be done framework or those activities sort of start to get into that type of thinking, where really what we're about is, yeah, but what do customers really want here? What do our people really want out of this? What do our citizens and our community really want from this? What do they value from us? Why are they coming to us rather than going to somebody else? Let's focus on those things first, and then second think about, well, how can we do that with the most economy, with the most efficiency, with the least waste.
That's right. So we're not saying efficiency is out the window, because that's not the reality of where
Ever,
we are.
ever.
Um, what we're saying is there's a risk if you get led just by efficiency, you're missing out on the impact. So why don't we get into some examples? So, Steve, do you want to tell the story about,
I will.
so
Yeah.
when something is more weighing, making decisions based on efficiency over effectiveness?
Yeah. So there's a great story out of Houston Airport from a few years back where the airport was looking at where are our customer complaints coming from. So the main airline and the airport were finding that the number one complaint coming from their customers was the amount of time that people were waiting at baggage carousels for their baggage. And anyone who's ever flown and gone to a busy airport probably appreciates just how poor that experience can be as everyone crowds around as close to the carousel as they can, waiting for the bags to come out. You can't see your own. You're trying to reach past people to get a bag, all of that kind of stuff. And that sort of sense of waiting that comes from like there not being bags there when you get there, the uncertainty around how long you have to take. So lots and lots of complaints, but it was a clear number one in terms of that complaint. I'm waiting too long for my bags. So they did quite a natural thing, which is they went and took a look at, well, where is that time being driven from? What takes the time to get a bag from an aircraft to the baggage carousel, and what can we do to speed that up? So very much a focus on speed and time, handling times, processing times, that kind of thing.
Mm.
They put in place technical solutions. They sped up the conveyor belts.
Mm.
They improved the automation of tag recognition, barcoding, these sorts of things to get bags off and to the right carousel. So all of that kind of stuff got automated and sped up. And at the end of the program of work, with millions of dollars being spent, they had got it down to a fairly world-class 8 minutes time from plane to baggage carousel, which was really quite something. Um, and so they were all quite anticipating next year's customer satisfaction surveys. And of course, the number one complaint the following year was the amount of time I spent waiting at the baggage carousel for my baggage. So they had seriously reduced it, and yet it was still the number one complaint. And their focus had been on efficiency. Should I tell the second part?
Yeah.
they went and had another look. So this time they went and looked at what customers were doing. And they focused on, well, what was the experience for customers? What were customers doing and what might be leading to still complaints? And they found as they followed passengers from the plane to the baggage carousel and stood around with them that of the 8 minutes that it took the bag to get from the plane to the baggage carousel, the passengers were spending about a minute or so getting from the plane to the carousel, and then they were spending 7 minutes standing around waiting in a state of uncertainty, in a state of, like anticipation to get on with their holiday or get on with their trip. Um, but they were spending 7 minutes out of the 8 minutes standing around waiting. They had the idea to change where the planes were gated so that instead of minimizing the amount of time and distance from the gate to the baggage carousel, they made it a longer journey. And essentially, it flipped it around. And this didn't really cost them any money. It was just a decision making around their gating. But they flipped the journey around so that it now took 7 to 8 minutes to walk from the plane to the baggage carousel. And just like magic, the bags were appearing. There was no waiting time from the customer's point of view, even though from a processing and logistics point of view, it was taking just the same amount of time. But from the customer's point of view, they were no longer standing around waiting. They were getting their bags as soon as they got to the carousel. And in result, the number of complaints about baggage times and the baggage handling dropped. But that part of it cost them almost nothing. But it came from an understanding of, well, what does this look like from the customer's point of view? And from the customer's point of view, it was about showing up, grabbing their bag, and moving on again.
Yeah.
But the walk from the plane to the carousel was engaged and active waiting.
It's
It
purposeful.
wasn't
Yeah.
passive. It gave them a chance to stretch their legs. There were things for them to see. And then they arrived and there were their bags. Very, very different perspective.
And so this one is where maybe the balance is off the other way, where we look at effectiveness and we're not thinking about efficiency. And so this example is one about an internal service. So if we think about an internal service within an organization, so procurement as is the example that we'll talk about here. And so in this case, there was as a very active organization, lots of procurement happening day in and day out. But what the pressure was they were finding that there was a bottleneck really in terms of procurement was expected to be able to review all of the things that were going out into the market over a certain amount. And so what was happening was, and the reasons were good ones in from I guess a value perspective and in terms of an effectiveness perspective, they wanted to make sure that the requests that were going out to suppliers into market were clear, that the briefs were asking the right things, that the contracts that they were going to be putting out were going to be ones that actually would bring value. This may be something that you're all very familiar with, either on the receiving side or within it. And so what was happening is that they had built into their service model and into their policy that said, okay, anything that's over a certain size needs to go through a procurement person. And a procurement person has to literally review this to make sure that it's actually appropriate for going out and that you've done all the things. And what ended up happening was there was this bottleneck because on the one hand, procurement wanted the business to be able to be self-sufficient and be able to self-manage procurements up to a certain size, but yet they had created these conditions that meant that wasn't possible. And so there was this real tug of war around, they wanted to be effective in terms of the service they were providing, but by creating such a high touch moment for everything, it meant that the largest tenders were having a lot of high touch support, which it should, because they were more high risk and more high value. And some of the smallest ones were having to go through hands and were getting almost the same amount of scrutiny. And so there was this imbalance of where should we be spending time, and what are we actually protecting, and actually what's risky and what's not risky. And so in trying to be effective in terms of creating a level of service support, they created a what essentially became a backlog, meaning that a whole bunch of requests that needed to go out were being delayed or being dragged and not being able to go out to the market, which created a knock-on effect in terms of the rest of the business being able to actually do what it needed to do. And so in that case, it was almost kind of effectiveness gone too far and actually becoming creating self-creating that constriction on the service. And so what we needed to do in this moment was to actually go, well, how can we make this more efficient? Because you don't want to hire more people. You do want people to be more self-serve. So we had to start to look kind of beyond kind of that moment and go, what are the conditions that we need to set so that we can build confidence that people can just go and do that themselves? And we can kind of relax and not have to see and sight and check and be sort of gatekeeping that. And in that moment, that's one of those tensions where you start to think about, from an efficiency point of view, you go, well, which parts of this can we scale or make self-service in a way that still creates that confidence in the environment? And so that can be through training, that can be through the templates, it can be through, maybe not everybody needs to get that support, but for those who have never done this before, they can. And so we had to play with some different levers to kind of go, well, let's look at what you think is effective and figure out other ways to augment that, because it's going to fall in on itself. And so this balance piece, I think, is the interesting one, where we get to effectiveness and efficiency.
Yeah. So we worked on we worked with a client a few years back where they had what seemed to be a fairly effective sales process, which was delivering them new customers, but it was doing it in such a way, or they subsequently had customers who weren't utilizing the service. So they were signing up effectively for free. That obviously takes effort on the part of the organization to process them, process the paperwork, set up accounts, all of that kind of thing. But then people weren't actually making use of the service. And the client, our client, was subsequently spending even more time following them up with reminders and incentives and marketing and, hey, you've got this thing, you should try using it, you should activate it, you should, if you're having any problems, talk to us about it. And over half of the people who were signing up for the service weren't making use of it and never did. And we were asked to come in and take a look at how that might be improved. We took this sort of dual lens. So we started with, well, what's the point of the service? Why are people trying to use it? Why would they want to make use of it? And what was leading to basically 1 in 2 customers signing up for something that they seem to not have any intention of using. So we looked at the sales process itself, and the sales process was kind of frictionless, and at the same time was not really addressing customer questions. So the customer went into these sort of sales meetings with a series of questions in mind. The salesperson had some features that they would talk through, and they were the same things, but just not in the right order. So what the customer wanted to hear was maybe the 4th thing out of 6 that the salesperson was going to talk about. So of course, I don't care about the first 3. I tune out, because the first thing that I want to hear about, I wasn't hearing. It was just blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, now you've told me the thing that got me interested. And so now I'm listening, but I've missed 3 of the key points that I'm subsequently going to start asking about. So customers were coming back and asking questions. Oh, can you tell me again about the thing at the beginning? Because I really wasn't paying attention. So the sales process was actually twice as long as it was. But what was also happening is people would go, you know what? I'll sign up for it. Bugger it. This is taking too long. It doesn't cost me anything. And the easiest way to end this conversation is to just say yes.
Mm.
So they were signing up a lot of customers. By redesigning the process and thinking about, well, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to answer some questions. We're trying to limit the number of customers that are never going to use the product because that's inefficient as well.
Mm.
And it's wasteful on our part to be chasing customers who really don't care. By making some relatively simple changes to the order in which the product features were spoken about and align them with customer questions. So we had to do that work to understand what was important. So that's the effectiveness piece. What's actually important to the customer? Talk about those things in the order that the customer was interested in them. So they're constantly engaged along the way, but equally they're in a position to go, oh, actually, point three means that I'm not a customer.
Mm.
So why don't we stop this right now? Let's not waste any more time. It doesn't meet my needs, so we can stop talking about it. Um, the number of customers dropped a little bit. So the number of people signing up dropped just a little bit. The
Mm.
number of people who made use of it increased quite a lot.
Mm.
But the cost of chasing customers for 3 months and 6 months and 12 months down the line saying, hey, you signed up and you haven't made use of it, which costs money every time, just dried up entirely. And they were able to essentially see within the space of the first 3 to 6 weeks of the relationship whether or not that was one worth pursuing. So we got effectiveness goals, but we also got a lot of efficiency along the way as well.
Mm. Nice. So how do we actually figure out what is effective? And I think this is
Big question.
big question. And how do we get really practical about that? Because that effectiveness can be coming from internally in terms of as an organization, what are our goals and mission and why do we exist and what are we trying to do? And effectiveness can come from the perspective of the people that we're serving as well, can come from the people that are delivering for you as well in terms of what makes it effective to actually deliver the service that you're providing. And so just to get some very simple shared language around this, we think of effectiveness as an outcome, but you can do it at different, you can measure effectiveness at different scales. And what's nice about thinking about it at the different scales is you can, let's take any one of those pressures that you may be facing about your service. One of the things you can start to think about is like, well, what's the scale of that pressure? Is it about the service as a whole? Is it about a phase of the service? So if we think about the flipping, is it about how we acquire, how someone acquires the service, or is it about how we support the service? Or is it about sort of a sub moment, a service moment that's in that? And so effectiveness, you can think about at different scales. And look, this is not an exhaustive list. We'll just say first off, and would love for if you are happy to share some of the things that you think about in terms of effectiveness. Here's just some different ways to be thinking about some of the signals of what might be effective, and then how do you then work backwards to then help make decisions around how you address the pressures. And so some of the things that we think about in terms of effectiveness might be from a functional, air quotes, perspective, functional thinking about things like I can complete or do what I need to do across any part, the whole or a part of that service journey with little friction. I don't think we're in a world of no friction, unfortunately, but for the most part, there's little friction there. Things like smooth internal orchestration. So we are the integrators of the experience. Our customers are not the integrators from point to point to point. We when somebody calls and asks a question, we're not saying, oh, that's not our department and just hanging up. And so part of that is around how orchestrated are we, kind of how locked arm are we around that. High serviceability. So we're able to actually meet the needs of the scale of people or entities or moments that we intend to intend to. And when you're not able to do that serviceability, and I know different services might use that as a metric of efficiency, but it can also be a metric of effectiveness because you do want to meet as much of the demand as you can. Reduce bottlenecking, so you don't have as much kind of holding back in certain parts, and maybe there's a sense of effort spent in the right places. Then you have things like around sort of experiential things in terms of, yes, you might be getting positive word of mouth. You might not be hearing anything. For some services, to hear nothing is actually, big thumbs up, because unfortunately, most of the time, whenever we hear back from people, oftentimes it's going to be where there's been friction or there's something wrong or I need support or something. And so that's sort of an easier one to go, oh, that's, there's some smoke signals
Yeah.
there.
I think customers are 50% more likely to complain than they are to thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get many more complaints than you get compliments as
Yes,
a service provider.
that's right. Repeat engagement. So, and this is especially for those of you who have services where people can choose to either come back or to stay with you. Staying with you, sort of longevity can be a sign, but also being repeat is also a sign. Low complaints, clarity around where to spend one-on-one time. And this is where we think about things like in the procurement example, sort of the sort of high touch, low touch kinds of experiences. Um, some moments really demand that human interaction, that human moment. Some of your services that you might be working and delivering are highly dependent and rely on sort of that one-on-one moment. And so that can be through counseling, that can be through healthcare, things like that. Um, but for those of you who have services that can have that high variability around some parts of the service, we want people to be able to do themselves because they want to be able to do it themselves and they don't want a whole bunch of rigmarole to go through that. Part of the things will be around, sorry, my daughter just came to the door and waved at me. So I lost my train of thought, but she's here. And so here I am now too. Procurement. Oh, if you have lots of variability across your service where you can have high touch and sort of low touch moments. One of the things I'm reminded of is some research that we were asked to do to better understand, do people want to, like, what kinds of support do people want for really kind of um, sort of high risk kind of purchases of things? Are people happy to kind of do that on their own, or are they happy, or do they need somebody to support them through that? And interestingly, I mean, that's going to be variable based on like,
Yeah.
I've done this before, please just get out of my way. Or I've got a whole bunch of customers who are like, if you don't give me somebody that I can rely on and get advice from, I'm really going to struggle. And so all of this is kind of talking about having to understand what's important to your customers and how do you know that impact that might be quite big in terms of what we're doing. Our service is contributing to uh, more circularity, or this service is around improved mental health, or this service is around how are the little moments and the big moments actually contributing to that? And I'll just give you this little example as um, a very simple mapping of something that you can think about for yourself with your own service in terms of if we think about the flip book again, for this particular example with a client, we broke that down into kind of almost three sort of subparts in terms of how do you become a customer, how are you a customer, and how do you stay a customer or leave. If you think about each of these sort of bubbles as those phases, you could dive into any one of these things and kind of look, there's a whole kind of little microcosm of stuff that's happening and orchestration that's happening in these moments. So when we think about effectiveness, one of the things that we did in this particular example was to think about, well, when it comes to acquiring I'll just back up for a second. If you think about this is three layered. So that the bottom layer is really around what's the experience internally for us to orchestrate and to deliver service. That middle part is the sort of the direct customer journey. In this case, for this client, they were delivering service to a customer who was then delivering service to another customer. So that's why we have these three layers. So in your world, you might just have the two. In your world, you might have four. It depends on, or you might have different things. So take this as just a exemplar of what you can do. But in this moment, what we did for this customer was to better understand what are the moments that matter for customers at each of the phases. And we call them key service moments. You can call them whatever you'd like. But what we did to do this is we really wanted to understand some of these phases have lots of different things that customers need to do or can do. But what we wanted to do is to narrow it in on if we get this one right, we know that when this goes right, all of those effectiveness measures and things that we know of for that moment,
Yep.
we know that we get good things out of that. We also know that if we get good things out of that, then that has a knock-on effect to the next thing and to the next thing. So having a mapping of this as back of a piece of paper with a pencil or using something like Miro or something like that to create some language for yourself around the different parts of your service, the different phases, and what are those moments that matter. What you can do with something like this is when you do have those pressures that are coming to you, you kind of have a backdrop to then say, okay, with this particular pressure, is that impacting a moment? Is that impacting a phase? Is that impacting the entire thing? It helps you with the scaling, but then it also can help you then go, okay, well, that moment was brought to when that pressure is happening. Well, why is that happening? You have to go into sort of that diagnostic mode.
Yeah.
And this is where the systems mapping and sort of the dynamics can really start to help you to better understand, well, if there's a bottleneck, so if I'll use the procurement one as an example, so we're in the service, we're receiving the service. If part of the service experience, is around this kind of provisioning into this is a product company, our product based business. But the thing here would be from a procurement perspective to be thinking about, well, okay, the pressure is that we're not getting out the requests that we want. And that means that we're not actually being able to deliver the services that we want to be delivering because we're not getting what we need. Okay, how do we work backwards then from that to go, where's that happening? And so we had to do some diagnostics around, well, the policy is driving behavior. The policy is saying that it has to happen. Okay, well, that's one thing that would need to change in order for that to let go. Two is we don't trust that the people in maybe we don't trust that the people in the business know what to do or how to do it. Okay, well, how do we build confidence that they do know what to do? Do we have to train them? Do they have to become experts, or can we create some scaffolding for them and create templates and kind of guides that kind of makes it safe for them to go there? So using something like this, then being able to dive in really, really, really helps. And so just some questions to be thinking about, I guess, as we kind of come to a close of our lunching and our learning, is let's think about what the pressure is and why that's the pressure. So what's driving this? And so what we suggest to you is to be thinking about pushing beyond the message to get to the real meaning. Different people might be coming at you with pressure because they themselves are being measured by certain things. They're getting pressure from other people. And so part of it is, how do we take a beat and take a minute and not be reactive to the pressure because it's all around us. So what's driving the pressure? Then starting to map into, well, what's the desired outcome? So let's say that pressure was gone. Is that the desired outcome? We just want that pressure to be gone, or is it because we address that something else happens? And so part of that starts to help get to a sense of, is this a pressure because we're in a panicked moment and we feel like we have to cut things, and so we just have to go, so it's quite short term?
Yep.
Is this more of a longer term play where we're wanting to really reshape or reevaluate the service? that will help give you some perspective there. Then the next question to ask ourselves is sort of where does that pressure kind of play out? Is it a moment? Is it a phase? Is it the whole service? That will help give you the scale of what your exploration might need to be. And again, we know all of this is helping you to drive towards decision making. And so this is where we're trying to figure out what's the scale of the decision making. Something like the map that's really helpful with that is it starts to help you see, like, well, if it is about the whole service and it plays out in lots of different parts, that means you have to be mindful of, if I'm tinkering over here, what's going to be happening over here. So that's really important. Then the next question that you then ask is, okay, now that you kind of know the area that the pressure that you're focusing on, where that's playing out, who is that change? If you were going to do anything in that moment, who are the players? Who would be impacted by that change? Sometimes we think that we're trying to address a pressure that's a real internal pressure. So we can't hire more people. We've got to make do with what we have, and we've got to reduce, service time. Okay, that's because we that's an internal desire, and it's a very reasonable request and exploration. But what's the impact of that? So this is where we start to go, are we are we are we doing something here that actually will create a really negative knock-on effect and actually will make more work in the end, and actually have more calls coming in, or whatever the thing you're dealing with. So that's really important around the dynamics.
Yeah.
The next question would be then, does the change fundamentally impact a key moment? Now, this is why we're making a distinction between just service moments and a key service moment. So this is really about, are there those, and again, on that mapping, how we were really strict with ourselves to go, what's the one or the two things that we absolutely have to get right.
Yep.
Because not everything needs to be gold plated. And I think that's the reality.
Yeah.
We can spend a lot of time really finessing, and I'm thinking about I'm thinking about kind of like, you can spend a lot of time kind of finessing the wording of something.
Sure.
And that will feel good because that feels more clear. But if that's something that nobody reads, or if that's something that doesn't actually impact a decision, it's like, well, is that where we spend time?
Yeah. And you see a lot of these decisions in programs like digital transformations, in programs where you're closing a physical presence and moving things online. A shift towards self-service and away from, like an in-person service where you're doing it yourself rather than somebody doing it either with you or for you. Like, it's in those moments where we start to make decisions that will fundamentally impact the value proposition and the way in which we're engaging with other people.
Yeah.
Those are critical times to really wrap your head around these things.
And it's not to say that, sometimes you might think, well, I think about the grocery store shifts, or making loan applications all self-serve and all automated,
booking flights online.
Booking flights. And so it's not to say that, sometimes we might just go, oh, it's just that people aren't used to it yet. They just need time. They'll just get used to it. And that may be very well be true. Like I love booking myself, right now. So I'm very happy with that. But you can't deny the friction of the transition. And so what that might flag for you is, how do we design the transition of the experience? And that might be kind of more of a stepped down version to get there, rather than sort of the kind of the shocking thing. And the last question, which is this is all just getting you ready to then go in and do the work and work with your people and work with the people you serve, is, if we change this, what are the positive and negative knock-on impacts? And so sometimes we're driven by, like, oh, if we do this, then that pressure goes away.
Yeah.
But what are some of the unintended consequences? So what could go wrong and what could go right?
Yep.
And I think playing through those scenarios for yourself are really useful, because that's the way for you to then go, like, allow yourself, especially on paper, to go, this is all the ways that change could go absolutely wrong. Are we okay with that? Do we need to build any confidence that we can avoid that? So this is where we get into prototyping things, testing things, using testing to build confidence. It doesn't have to be complicated, but just start working with the people who are going to be impacted so you can start to get a flavor for, you're never going to get 100% confidence, or certainty, I mean, but you can get a bit more confident that maybe the direction you're going in won't be too.
Let me give you a really quick example. We worked with a client last year who the customer service team received a volume of calls inquiring about the status of where something was. The IT group implemented a change on their behalf. It wasn't something that they necessarily asked for, but they implemented a change on their behalf that gave customers direct visibility over the status of things. So the status became an automated thing that customers could now see. The thinking being that that would cut down on the number of calls of people saying, well, where's my thing up to? It makes perfect sense. What they didn't resolve was that the status information was often incorrect and out of date because behaviorally it wasn't being kept up to date well. So by giving visibility directly to the customer, all it did was gave customers incorrect information or out of date information and created more concerns and generated a higher volume of calls to the customer center going, oh, hang on a minute, that's not what I was told. I was promised this other thing, and now, like, what's going on here? Why hasn't this been updated? Why can't I see? And it actually created chaos.
So playing through that scenario of how this could have gone wrong, maybe look, you can't anticipate everything.
Prototype would have helped.
Prototype may have helped. But I think being able to allow yourself this space, and I think sometimes some of our organizations that we are working in are really like, oh, we don't have time, we just have to act, or we're just going to test live. And it's like, that's fine, but there are sort of safer ways to do that, to build your confidence and to reduce risk. And actually that investment of a little bit of time, a little bit of effort actually might save you a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
We recognize that some of your decisions are being pressured where you just have to go, 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 go.
Yeah.
So our encouragement would be leverage what you have and what you know. Use the signals that you do have. So from whatever you're measuring, however you're gathering, and if you are a service that has call centers or has any kind of stuff, that is, you are getting research data for free every day. There's a lot of insight there. Create ways and mechanisms for you to keep learning and understanding what's going on kind of live. Create some language for yourself around what those services, what makes up your service and what really matters, so that as you're dealing with those pressures, on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, you've got some things to play with.
And be really clear around where your investment will have diminishing returns and where those sort of trade-off points become where, look, it's as effective as the customer cares for, and the efficiency gains that we might get from here aren't worth the investment that we're putting in. We would be much better off, and our customers much better served by thinking somewhere else and focusing our energy somewhere else where we can have that effectiveness impact.
That's right. We thank you so much for lunching with us. We've got 4 more minutes left. Just wanted to let you know, I'm excited to get into the chat. If there's things that you're interested in having a lunch about, and we can input forward, please share with us, and we're happy to pull that together. We've got one coming up on next month on August 13th, which is Lunch and Learn, where we're going to be exploring how do you go from strategy to implementation. And what we mean by that is, when you go the hard yards of actually creating strategies, well, how are those strategies being designed within your organizations? Are they being designed in a way that can actually come to life? And what are the ways in which that you can make all of the things that you're doing, whether that's a strategy around your service or around how your business operates, how do you actually get some traction and action? And there's some real practical sort of ways to be designing with the people who are impacted and bringing that to life and translating the concept into reality. So we'd love to share that with you as well, and we'll get that link out to all of you. Thanks to you all. Hope you have a lovely day. Hope you had some nice lunch. Nice to see your faces. And let us know if you have any questions or want some deeper stories to share.
Will the recording be available as one that's probably worth a quick?
Yes, we are going to share this recording out, so we'll get that out probably tomorrow morning.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we'll get that out in our newsletter as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks. Nice to see you all. Good luck with your services. I love services. Oh, I could make a jingle. That'll be
Next time.
next time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Beth. That was really much appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your time. Nice
Happy Thursday again.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Cheers.
See ya. I'll stop sharing. I'll stop recording.